Shields up, Ironbreakers. Rurikhan here coming at you with another video. Welcome back to Final Fantasy XIV, and today I'm going to be bringing you my tanking guide. The purpose of this video is to equip you with the knowledge to get started with the tanking role in Final Fantasy XIV, whether you are a complete newcomer to the game or whether you're someone who's been playing 14 for a while but you've just decided to start tanking now. When it comes to experienced tanks, I'm not sure if you guys are going to be getting a whole lot of this video, but hey, you never know, so let's just get things started. So one of the first things that you need to do as a tank is you need to turn on your tanking aura. And I know some of you guys are going to be like, really? That's what we're starting at? But you'd be surprised how many times you can actually jump into a dungeon and all of a sudden the entire group is dead, and all because the tank made the very basic mistake of not turning on their tanking aura. Now when it comes to Paladin, which is what we're playing right now, our tanking aura is going to be called Iron Will. If you're playing a Dark Knight, that will be an ability called Grit. If you are playing Warrior, it's an ability called Defiance. And if you're playing a Gunbreaker, it's an ability called Royal Guard. So why is it important for me to tell you about your tanking aura? That's because whenever you happen to be tanking a lower level dungeon, the game will usually turn off your tanking aura because it's sinking down your level. So every time the game sinks you down to a lower level, it's going to turn off your tanking aura. So, you know, this is going to happen even when, say, you might be doing a Fate that's of a lower level and you sink your level, they're going to turn off your tanking aura, so pay attention to that. It will usually be reflected on your job gauge if your aura is on or not, so you can just look at your job gauge. There'll usually be some kind of an indicator letting you know, hey, your tanking aura is on, or hey, your tanking aura is off. So pay attention to that. Each job gauge has different ways of showing it. If you have the simplified job gauge, you can just look at your buffs, which you can see right here. So whenever you turn on Iron Will, you know, getting aggro from enemies is actually fairly easy. I know that some people tend to have like a little bit of anxiety because they're like, oh my god, what if the mob gets away from me? What am I gonna do? It's very hard for you to actually lose aggro in Final Fantasy XIV. Like, you would have to not actually be using your abilities. You'd have to be sitting there, and I think even if you were just auto-attacking, you might even then just be able to maintain aggro a little bit, but you have to almost go AFK in order to lose aggro, so don't be too concerned about, you know, losing aggro. Now, some of you guys might be wondering, but Rurikhan, why would I want to turn off my aggro aura? Why isn't it just always on whenever I'm playing a tank? There are some situations in some raids where you might want to turn it off if you are the off tank, or, you know, maybe due to certain mechanics, tank swaps. There's a multitude of reasons of why this can be important at a later stage, but for now, as a newcomer to the tanking role, just keep this thing on at all times and don't even worry too much about it, okay? Just remember to turn it on whenever you're going into a dungeon if you're the main tank, and then later down the line when it comes down to tank swaps and whatnot, hopefully you will have acquired more knowledge on your journey as a tank. Now, the next thing that we got to focus on is you got to learn your 1, 2, 3s. And this is very important because I'm just going to tell you guys about the 1, 2, 3s, and the rest of the rotation you're going to have to research on your own, because if I was to try and give you, you know, detailed descriptions of, you know, the openers of the Paladins and the openers of the Dark Knight and the openers of the Warrior and the Gunbreaker, we could have basically a full 1-hour video just discussing those, and on top of it, you wouldn't actually learn all that much to actually get started because you're not really going to master your opener in 5 minutes, okay? It's going to take a significant amount of time to master it. I would argue that I've got, like, I don't even know how many hours with my Paladin, and I probably still haven't properly mastered my opener. Like, you know, I have an idea of the order in which the skills should go, and usually I'm pretty good about doing it, but sometimes I'll still drop the rotation every now and then. It happens to the best of us. But anyway, let's get things started. Your 1, 2, 3s when it comes to the Paladin are going to be Fast Blade, Riot Blade, and Rage of Halone, which eventually gets upgraded into Royal Authority. But these would be your 1, 2, 3s. Fast Blade, Riot Blade, and over here would be like Rage of Halone, which you get at like level 26. But because I'm level 80 on this character, that is what this one is going to be. And this would be your very basic single target rotation. So you go up, and you do your 1, 2, 3. And to get you started, this is enough. Like, if you just do this on a boss fight in a dungeon, the boss will stick to you like glue. The boss will never let you go. It doesn't matter how much damage everybody else is doing. If you're just doing your 1, 2, 3, the boss is not going to let go. And why is it important for you to be aware of this? It's because I know that a lot of people get nervous when it comes to tank, and they're like, oh, but what if I lose the aggro? If you just identify your 1, 2, 3 and you do your 1, 2, 3, you're going to be fine. Okay, the boss is not going to randomly one-shot someone unless that's a mechanic, at which point that's not going to be your problem. That's going to be the healer's problem. So just master your 1, 2, 3s to get you started, right? And your 1, 2, 3s for the Paladin are, like I said, Fast Blade, Riot Blade, Rage of Alone. For the Dark Knight, they're going to be Hard Slash, Siphon Strike, and Soul Leader. So if you're playing the Dark Knight, look for those abilities in your actions, which you go to your actions and traits. And then you can look those abilities there. And by the way, I know that my menus look different from yours because I'm playing with a controller, most likely. So your menus are going to show up in little red balls on the lower right-hand side. So you just look for the one that says character, then instead of clicking on character, click on actions and traits. That'll bring up this window, and then you can look up all of your different skills and all of that stuff, right? So for the Dark Knight, like I said, Hard Slash, Siphon Strike, Soul Leader. For the Warrior, Heavy Swing, Maim, and Storm's Path. And for the Gunbreaker, Keen Edge, Brutal Shell, and Solid Barrel. Now, these are your 1, 2, 3s for single target. Naturally, when you're in the dungeon, you're not just going to be doing single target. You're going to need an AoE ability as well. And luckily enough, the tanks are the ones that get the first AoE ability the earliest. So, you know, because we're the ones that usually have to use the AoE ability to make sure that the mobs just don't cleave the entirety of the party and murder everybody. So we're the ones that get the AoEs the earliest. Now, when it comes to the Paladin, your very first AoE is going to be Total Eclipse. When it comes to Dark Knight, it'll be Unleash. When it comes to the Warrior, it'll be Overpower. When it comes to the Gunbreaker, it will be Keen Edge. So once again, you know, go find that particular ability in your hotbar and place it somewhere, you know, on your actions and place it somewhere on your hotbar. So I gave you the 1, 2, 3s of single target. Now I'm going to give you the 1, 2s of AoE. Now the 2 comes usually much later. So in my case, I get it at around level 40. I believe that Warrior gets it. It might get it at 40 as well, or at 45. I don't know. But anyways, the Dark Knight is Unleashed, like I said, and then it goes into Stalwart Soul. The Warrior is Overpowered, and then it goes into Mithril Tempest. And the Gunbreaker is Demon Slice, and then it goes into Demon Slaughter. So the way these would work is, like, say you have these 2 targets over here. You would do your Total Eclipse, and then you would do your Prominence, and there you go. And you just do this. So in an AoE scenario, you just do this, and so long as you're hitting every mob, so you have to position yourself appropriately to hit every mob. So long as you're hitting all of them, you're fine. You're perfectly fine. You're not going to lose aggro as well, you know. And if you don't have both of these, then just do the one. Then just do Total, what's it called again? Total Eclipse. Just do Total Eclipse. Just spam that. That will also hold aggro, no problem whatsoever. Now, ideally, if you have 2 targets, you might want to do your 1, 2, 3 on each of the targets. But look, we're just teaching you the basics here. So whenever you're in an AoE situation, if you have more than 1 target, just use your AoEs, okay? There's going to be plenty of time for you to min-max your rotation later down the line. But these are your 1, 2, 3s. These are things that you will want to master early on. And, you know, this is just like the bread and butter of being a tank. And you guys are like, why is dealing damage so important? Because up until this point, I'm trying to learn how to be a tank. The only thing you taught me is how to deal damage. Let me tell you something about Final Fantasy XIV, okay? You might be new here if you're asking that particular question. The reasoning is every single job is expected to deal damage in this game. Doesn't matter if you're the healer, doesn't matter if you're the tank, you're supposed to deal as much damage as you possibly can. As a matter of fact, I'm going pretty easy on you because I'm only teaching you the 1, 2, 3s of single target and the 1, 2s of AoEs. So I'm only giving you like 5 skills for you to keep track of so far. So those are like your bread and butter. Just try to use them as much as possible because I do expect you to learn your class more by experimenting, by reading your tooltips, and by actually utilizing every tool at your disposal to deal as much damage as humanly possible. Because if you don't do that, then you're never really going to be amazing at it. Because being a tank in this game is a lot more than just, you know, keeping threat and surviving. It's keeping threat, surviving, and dealing as much damage as you possibly can. That is what people expect, okay? So keep that in mind. Well, like I said, for starters, you can just jump into a dungeon with the knowledge that I just gave you, and you'll be fine. And we haven't even talked about cooldowns. But naturally, we will have to talk about cooldowns. But before we do, let's talk about your global cooldown and your off global cooldown abilities. Why is this important? Every character is going to have abilities that are off the global cooldown. What does this mean? Well, your global cooldown is whenever I hit an ability, notice that there's a little wheel that indicates that all the other abilities are now in cooldown. See, all of the other weapon skills are rolling around, okay. Then I hit another one, and all the weapon skills are rolling around, indicating, okay, we're on cooldown. It's 2.5 seconds of global cooldown. But there are certain abilities that you can weave in between your global cooldown. So in my case, those would be Spirits Within and Circle of Scorn. You'll have to identify, the ones that you can do in each of the classes. The way that you do is you look at the ability description, which is right now on the lower right-hand side of the screen, and it will tell you it's an ability. So if you look at, for instance, say Fast Blade, you'll notice that that is a weapon skill. If we look at Circle of Scorn, you'll notice that it is an ability, and it is an instant ability. That means you can cast it at any point. As I was editing the video, I noticed I didn't really make this point very clear, so allow me to elaborate a little and add a few more nuggets of wisdom. If one of your actions says weapon skill or spell, it will trigger the global cooldown. And while the global cooldown is in effect, you won't be able to cast another weapon skill or spell. If an action says it's an ability, it will not require the global cooldown and can be weaved during the global cooldown. These abilities are often referred to as OGCDs.
More like OGCD's nuts!
Which stands for off global cooldown. Certain animations will limit how many or how fast you can weave your OGCDs in there, so if an action feels unresponsive, it's probably because you're still animation locked. And while we're on the topic of global cooldowns, you should refrain from using macros that include weapon skills or spells, as they will lead to an overall DPS loss due to how Final Fantasy XIV handles player actions. And you might consider this to be a design flaw, but in reality what is happening is that the server will precast your actions and make up for potential latency issues to maximize your DPS. We could get more technical, but to keep things simple, using the basic actions means your actions are performed faster than if you put them in a macro. You can macro abilities, but you should still avoid it if possible. Now back to the video. So basically, if I use Fast Blade and then I use Circle of Scorn, it will do it even though the global cooldown is still rolling. This is going to be very important for you to min-max your DPS. Figure out which abilities you're going to be able to use in between each of these global cooldowns so that you can go ahead and optimize it to the nth degree and actually pump out some deeps. That is what will be expected of you. I would recommend you guys to check out Desperius because he has some pretty good rotation guides for each of the classes in the game. And those are usually some pretty short videos, unlike what I'm going to be doing here for you guys today. So it should be fairly easy for you to get an idea. Now, bear in mind, you don't have to have your rotation like completely perfect to jump into a dungeon. As a matter of fact, I would argue that, seriously, the only way for you to perfect your rotation is if you're doing it in a dungeon. Because, sure, you can sit here in the training dummy and practice all day until you can figure out, okay, now I'm supposed to do fight or flight. Now I'm supposed to do my dot. Now I'm supposed to do this. Now I'm supposed to go into Royal Authority. And then I'm supposed to go into my, what's the name of this thing again? Atonement combo. And it's yeah, sure, you can stay in this dummy and do this all day long. The problem is, when you get to a dungeon, what happens when the boss puts a marker on you, right? The boss is going to do a telegraph, and you're going to have to move. And when you're moving, you're like, oh my god, I don't know what button to press now. You're going to just just stagger all over the place. So it's very important for you. You get the basics, you get your 1, 2, 3s, you get your 1, 2s, and the second you get those, just jump into a low-level dungeon and try it out. Just try it out, because practice makes perfect. And if you wipe, then don't worry about it, because the community is not going to go too hard on you. At least most of them probably shouldn't. And they're usually pretty nice about things, and you just tell them, hey, I'm a new tank, I'm, starting out, I'm trying to learn this, so forgive me if I make a mistake or something. Community is usually extremely understanding when it comes to that kind of stuff, okay? Now, another important thing that you will notice throughout the footage that I will be playing throughout this video is that whenever I engage the enemies, you'll notice that some arrows pop up from the top of their head and usually point towards me. That's a good thing. That means that they're targeting me. But these little arrows that they show up only during brief moments of time, these little arrows indicate who they are targeting. So if they switch targets, you'll see a little arrow pop up from their head and target somebody else. And if you see them target somebody else, you'll know, uh-oh, he's not targeting me. This is a bad thing, because every monster is supposed to be targeting you and nobody else in your party. If they're targeting somebody else in your party, you've probably made a mistake somewhere. So you got to make sure to rectify that, target that monster, hit him with a 1, 2, 3, do something, throw your ranged attack at them, which in my case is shield lob. Look at whatever happens to say in the description of another class that says delivers a ranged attack. Throw your shield at them. Use provoke, which is another ability that every tank has. It is actually a roll action, and just use that and get aggro back. Speaking of roll actions, let's talk about those as well. Now, earlier I told you guys to go to your actions and traits, look at your abilities and all of that stuff, but these are not the only abilities you have available to yourself. There's also roll actions. These are shared by all of the tanks. That means that, Rampart, Low Blow, Provoke, all of these are available to all of the other tanks. So keep that in mind. Make sure to put these in your bars. They are all important. Yes, even Shirk. Although Shirk, we're not going to talk about it in this video, but try to find a spot for it in your bars, because it will be important for you at some point in some raid or something like that, okay? Now, before we jump into actual cooldown usage, I'd like to call out your attention to a very specific HUD element. If you go to customize your HUD, which the HUD in Final Fantasy XIV is completely customizable, and by the way, yours is most likely going to look significantly different from mine. Do not try to copy mine unless you feel like it would be good for you, at which point copy it all you want. But the idea here is you want to do a UI that, where things are, where you feel like you would naturally want them to be, so that you can get to everything at a moment's notice. Now, the one UI element I want to call your attention to is Target Info Progress Bar. You should be able to find it here. I'm not exactly sure if you have to separate it from the boss bar. You might have to, but if you do, you can just go to Target Info, and then in here there should probably be like all of the different ones. And you can see that there's an option here that says Display Target Info Independently. So that is going to separate like your target's bars depending on each one of them. So you're going to have the HP, you're going to have their status, which are going to be like status ailments, and you're going to have the progress bar. Now, the most important one that I want you to keep track of is the progress bar. And I want you to make sure that you potentially make it bigger and put it somewhere where you definitely won't miss it when a target is doing something. So in my case, I put it right smack dab in the middle of the screen, and it's at 200%, which is as big as it can get. And to be honest, if I could, I'd make it like 400%, because look, I'm 39 years old and my eyes, they don't see as well as they used to. So I need things to be blatantly obvious and right in my face when they're particularly important. And Target Info Progress Bar is going to be extremely important for you, because whenever a target is casting an ability, this is going to show on your screen. And now you guys are wondering, why do I care if a target's casting an ability, if it shows on my screen? That's because sometimes, when you're fighting a boss, they have a tendency to do these things called Tankbusters. And as you can imagine, with a name such as Tankbuster, that is not going to be particularly healthy for you if you get hit by one of those. And that is when you're supposed to start using those nice little cooldowns that we were looking at. So, if you see a boss performing an ability and you don't see like a telegraph on the ground, one of those orange markers, then most likely that means that the boss is doing something that is going to either hit you or hit your whole party. So until you know what the boss is actually doing, it's a good idea to pop one of your cooldowns to prevent the boss from murdering you. Now, one of those cooldowns can be Rampart, which, like I said, you have your actions and traits, and you have your roll actions. And Rampart right here is going to reduce damage taken by 20%. So if you see the boss channeling something, look to the ground, you don't see anything orange on the ground, might as well pop a Rampart just in case. Your healer is going to thank you immensely. Your healer is going to love you if you do this, okay? As a matter of fact, if your healer is a cat girl, dude, she might just take you straight to a motel and just, it is what it is, Healers really love it if you actually pop your cooldowns whenever possible. This is actually one of the things that a lot of tanks have a tendency to forget. They know how to run, they know how to AoE things, but a lot of the times they don't know that they should be using their cooldowns. Now, another cool thing is you have a low blow over here. This is an instant ability, and it basically stuns things. So this is something that doesn't actually cost you DPS because it's off the global cooldown. So you can do this in between, like, you know, your 1-2-3s, like your Fast Blade, Riot Blade, and Goring Blade. You can just pop in a little low blow in there and you can stun certain targets. Not all targets are stunnables. Most of the bosses are not stunned. So, you know, this is not something that you'll probably be using in boss fights, but, you know, the occasional ad, maybe it's doing a nasty AoE and you're like, you know, I don't feel like moving, boom, pop a low blow. Again, remember, not all of the mobs are going to be affected by this, so practice, try it out, whatever. Provoke, this is basically just to get enmity if an enemy runs away from you and you lost aggro. Provoke is like the easiest way of getting it done. Once again, it is an ability, it is instant, so you can do it in between your global cooldowns. Interject, this is an interrupt. Now, this is another one of those reasons why I wanted you to pay attention to that casting bar on the bosses, because every now and then that bar will flash yellow and red, and if it's flashing yellow and red, that means the boss is doing an ability that can actually be interrupted. And in those situations, you want to pop this bad boy right there, and it'll interrupt the boss's cast, and you can just carry on doing whatever you were doing, and you will probably save some damage. Then we have Reprisal over here. Reprisal is going to be an AoE effect that reduces the damage dealt by enemies by 10%. So imagine if you pull a pack of mobs and, you know, you have like 3 or 4 mobs on top of you, you pop Reprisal, all of them are now dealing 10% more damage. Pretty good. Also, this can be used on bosses in case the bosses are doing an AoE that's about to hit everybody in your party. You can also pop this and it will reduce the damage that the boss would have done to your party by 10%. Then another one that we have here is Arm's Length. Arm's Length is actually really, really good because the name, the actual description of this skill is a little bit deceiving, particularly if you're not someone who plays Final Fantasy games like me. Because it says there, creates a barrier nullifying most knockbacks and drawn-in effects. You're like, okay, so if a boss slaps me around, I can use this, the boss is not going to slap me around. Additional effect, slow plus 20% when barrier is struck. So if the boss slaps me, or if the mob slaps me, they become slower. Now, the key aspect here is, if you're like me, you look at this and you're like, okay, so they move slower, I don't care. I'm the tank, I'm already tanking them, who cares? The thing is, that slow right there is not a movement slow. That is an attack speed slow. So anything that touches you during arm's length loses 20% attack speed, which makes this a really, really good cooldown. If you're in an AoE situation, you got a bunch of mobs sitting at you, you pop that arm's length, and they're all going to be attacking you 20% slower, which makes the damage a lot more predictable for your healer, and you know, it's just a good mitigation tool all around. Then there's also Shirk. Shirk, you're going to be using this mostly during tank swaps and whatnot. I'm not going to go into too much detail about this, but the idea is this transfers 25% of your threat to somebody else. So this is usually something that you'll use, like if a raid mechanic calls for you to swap tanks because you get a debuff or something, then you can shirk your threat onto the other tank. Like I said, it's important to have this in your bars, but don't stress too much about this particular ability just yet. Now, on top of those abilities, each class is going to have their own physical and magical damage cooldowns, which are going to vary from class to class. So, for instance, the Paladin has this one called Hallowed Ground. This basically makes you invulnerable for 10 seconds, which is like, I think it's the best invulnerability button out of all the tanks. Warriors get Holmgang, Gunbreakers get Super Ballad, and Dark Knights get Living Dead, which these all have different mechanics depending on which tank you have, so make sure to read them. Then you also have another one in the case of the Paladin would be Sentinel, which is a 30% damage reduction. All tanks have some kind of like percentage damage reduction on top of Rampart. So just look at whichever that cooldown is. And actually, most tanks should actually have like 2 of these, I think. Paladin only gets 1 because we're already overpowered as hell. But the idea is find all of your cooldowns so that you get an idea of what tools you have available at you at any given time. So to give you an idea of the way that I play the game and how I would recommend that you play the game, put those cooldowns together in a spot that you can like easily identify them. So as you can see right here, I have Sentinel, Rampart, Arm's Length, Sheltron, and then I have my Hallowed Ground reasonably close by. So I know, here we go. Here's 5 nice little cooldowns that I can pop at a moment's notice. Don't even have to worry too much about it. However, besides these cooldowns, which all have like lengthy cooldowns, like Hallowed Ground over here has got 420 seconds recast, Rampart's got 90 seconds, Sentinel 120, Reprisal has 60, Arm's Length has 120, so all of these are long cooldowns, right? There's usually one that every single tank has that's on a significantly lower cooldown. Now, in the case of the Paladin, that one is Sheltron. You can't see it on mine because I have a macro for it that uses a couple of additional things. But Sheltron has a cooldown of 5 seconds, but it also uses up 50 of the Paladin's gauge. So this is one where basically the way that I think about Sheltron and the way that I think about the equivalents in other tanks, which by the way are, in the case of Dark Knight, the Blackest Knight, which unfortunately the Dark Knight only gets theirs at like level 70. So you're going to be running without that one for a while if you're leveling a Dark Knight. But yeah, it would be the Blackest Knight for the Dark Knight. It would be Raw Intuition for Warriors, and it would be Heart of Stone for Gunbreakers. And the way that I think about this particular cooldown is whenever I'm tanking, I pop it whenever it's up. And that's the way that you should think about it as well. For most situations, that is the way to go about it. It's like, oh, do I have the resources to do this? I'm going to do this to reduce damage. Once again, your healer will thank you. So try to keep this one up as much as you possibly can. Naturally, as you begin to learn more about raids and whatnot, you'll know, okay, the boss is doing this thing. I should save my cooldown for this thing that the boss is doing. But when you're just getting started, whenever that cooldown comes up, boom, just pop it. Don't even think about it too much. Just like, oh, it's up. I'm going to pop it right now. Boom, done. Okay? Because listen, here's the thing about cooldowns, okay? Cooldowns in Final Fantasy XIV, there's only one situation where you should not use a cooldown. You want to know what situation that is? If you're a dumbass. That's when you don't use a cooldown. Because other than that, you use your cooldowns every single chance you have. It's that simple. Because let me tell you, there's so many people that will go through an entire dungeon without using a single cooldown, making everything harder for everybody else. So let me tell you something about pulling mobs, right? The expectation when you get to endgame dungeons is for wall-to-wall pulls. You guys are like, wall-to-wall pulls, what the hell is that? If you've never tanked, you're gonna be going like, that sounds like some really crazy stuff. But the idea is, by the time you reach the end game dungeons, most of them are made in a way where you can basically pull everything until eventually you reach a barrier where the game physically doesn't let you pull any more mobs. And at that point, you get everything together, you AoE everything down, and you kill everything. That's kind of like the expectation when it comes to trash in most dungeons in Final Fantasy XIV. Again, most end game dungeons, because the earlier dungeons were not necessarily made with that in mind. So the way that I would advise you to do things is, for starters, on your very first dungeon, pull one pack at a time. Just tell everybody you're new to this, you don't know what you're doing, you're going to be pulling one pack at a time. So pull one pack at a time, get comfortable with doing your AoE rotation, and just take it easy, nice and slow. Then on your second dungeon, pull 2 packs instead of 1. So you pull 1 pack of mobs, then run ahead, pull another pack of mobs. And then, after you do this, pop a cooldown. Now, you guys might be wondering, which one of my cooldowns? There's so many. So you can go for Arm's Length and Reprisal. I usually do this a lot on my first pull. I'll just do Arm's Length and Reprisal. And then if I see that I'm, once the effect of those two wears off, if I see that I'm still taking too much damage, I might pop a Rampart. But usually one of these will be enough, right? So you'll pop Arm's Length and Reprisal. Then you move on to the next pack. By the time you reach it, most likely Sheltron and Reprisal and Arm's Length are still going to be in cooldown. So then you pop Rampart. And then if you have to pull another pack, you'll pop Sentinel. But the idea here is pull lots of mobs and use your cooldowns to mitigate the damage so that the healer doesn't have to heal you as much, because guess what the healer actually wants to do? You see, because what most people do when they roll healers, they don't actually want to heal. They just want to DPS. They want to see how low they can let your health drop and then just pop like a big beefy off GCD heal. And they don't actually want to use their global cooldowns to heal you, which is why it is your job to mitigate as much incoming damage as possible so that the healer can press its DPS buttons, because that makes the healers real happy. Okay? So keep that in mind. And like I said, every class is supposed to DPS. Okay? So This is the way that you do things. You pull like 1 or 2 packs, depending on your level of experience or how you feel comfortable. Always remember, you should do things at a rhythm that you feel comfortable. Naturally, you will encounter certain players that will try to probably push you to go a little bit faster. Most likely, you know, if there's an experienced healer and he sees that you're only pulling 1 pack at a time, there's a high probability that he's going to run ahead of you and pull the other pack into you. Don't panic. Start using your AoE abilities. He brought this on himself. He's the one who's going to have to heal you now. So keep that in mind. The thing is, ultimately, by the time that you become experienced enough, you're going to be pulling wall to wall. That is the end game for warriors when it comes to dungeon. You're going to be pulling wall to wall. That's just the way that things are going to work. One of the things that I would recommend is that if you see that you're coming up close on a boss, try to save at least one of your cooldowns, because like I said, you should use your cooldowns at any chance that you get. But right before a boss, try to keep one of them available for the potential tank buster that you will get, because like I told you guys, when you're fighting a boss, you can see his health, his little cast bar. If you see the cast bar is doing something and there's no marker on the ground, most likely it's going to be something that'll hurt you or hurt your whole party, and you'll want to pop one of your cooldowns in there to make sure that you're not going to get completely and utterly murdered. Now, another thing is, you're not just supposed to use defensive cooldowns. Yes, you're a tank, but every tank is going to have offensive cooldowns that allow you to do more damage. So in the case of the paladins, that will be fight or flight, but I'm not going to go into too much detail with the other classes, because when you start looking at damage rotations, things are going to differ wildly, because paladin has a magical damage phase, gunbreakers have their gnashing fang combo, warriors have their fell cleave inner release phase thing going on, and Dark Knights, I don't even know which one the Dark Knight is, because my Dark Knight's like level 77, I think. I haven't even maxed them out, so I don't even have access to like the shadow double, shadow clone jutsu, whatever the hell is the thing that they do. But yeah, basically at this point is really when you want to go look up like a Desparious video, or, you know, a video from another content creator that goes really in depth about the specific class. I might potentially do one of those on Paladin if you guys are curious, because I do feel like I know enough about the Paladin at this point to tell you guys my thoughts on it. But yeah, that's kind of like the general idea. Then on top of that, it's just keep in mind that every tank is going to have specific utility that you can share with other players, and this is again going to be something that is going to differ wildly from tank to tank. So in my case, for instance, I have Divine Veil, and what Divine Veil does is it puts a barrier on me that doesn't actually do anything until I get healed. But after I get healed, which I can do, Paladin's the only tank that can just straight up has a heal, it will actually put a shield up on your target. So if we were to target myself now, we can't really see that there's a shield, but there would be a shield on me because, yeah, that's what Divine Veil does. It places a shield not just on you, but on your whole party. So Divine Veil is another one of those abilities that I just pop it all over the place, although there are ideal times to do it, like, oh, the boss is about to do an AoE. Pop Divine Veil, if the healer heals you, boom, you're good to go. The Paladin also has the best animation in the game in the form of Passage of Arms. And this is basically party utility, so anyone that stands behind these wings, they're going to receive, I believe it's 30% less damage. No, it's 15% less damage. So, you know, this is what I have. Other characters have something else. Like, I don't remember the name of the one for Gunbreakers. I think it's Heart of Light. I forget. But, you know, they also have an ability called Heart of Light, I think, which also does like some kind of an AoE. The warriors also have one. Like, every tank has like an AoE ability that's basically a utility that allows you to reduce damage to your party. So keep those in mind for whenever big AoEs are coming. And, you know, just basically read your tooltips. You know, just try to read your tooltips, try to get as much utility as possible out of your tank as well. Because ultimately, that is the everlasting quest of a tank, is to try to optimize your rotation to ensure that you get as much damage as possible, while also getting as much survivability as possible, while also weaving in as much of the OGCDs as possible, and, you know, using your cooldowns and all of that stuff. Now, before we wrap things up, I once again noticed as I was editing the video that I feel like I should address a couple of more miscellaneous tips. Tip number 1, Telegraphs in Final Fantasy, the orange markers on the ground, are quite unique when compared to something like World of Warcraft, because the way they work is, if you're still standing on the orange when it disappears, you're getting hit. It doesn't matter how much you run or which abilities you cast, if you were standing in the orange when it disappeared, you're taking it in the face. And most likely, you're going to be getting a vulnerability stack, which is Final Fantasy XIV's way of telling you that you messed up. The advantage of this is that the second that orange marker is gone, it means it's safe, even if the animation of the attack hasn't played out yet. It can be a little disorienting at first, but you'll get used to it. Also keep in mind, not all markers are the same, some have unique mechanics, so make sure to pay attention. Number 2. There's a system in-game called the Hall of the Novice, which becomes available around level 15, if I remember correctly. And this is a great way to practice any role and what you'll be expected to do in dungeons and raids, so make sure to take advantage of it. Tip number 3. When tanking a boss, the usual etiquette is hitting it once with an ability to gain that initial threat, and then run past it and face it away from the raid. Usually this means the boss will end up facing north in most situations. Number 4. When tanking anything, only move if you have to. Once you position the boss in a safe way, avoid moving at all costs unless mechanics demand it. You see, certain DPS classes have positional abilities which require them to hit the boss in the rear and flanks, and they often need to switch between those two positions. If you're moving the boss or trash packs, it's going to make it harder for everybody else to do their job. Number 5. Certain bosses will jump around the boss arena and end up with their rear side facing a wall. In these cases, try moving them slightly away so that the DPS gets access to the rear of the boss for the mechanics that we talked about previously. Number 6. There's an action in the game called Sprint. Bind it and use it to go faster when needed. This can be used during pulls if you're running wall to wall, and during boss fights if a mechanic is about to trap you. Now back to the video. But hopefully this gets you started. Like I said, the most important thing at the very beginning is just get your 1, 2, 3s and your 1, 2s, jump into a dungeon and start practicing. Because you can be at a training dummy all day long practicing your rotation, and then you get to a dungeon, you're going to be like, wait, my targets are moving. This is way harder. Yes, your targets move. That's kind of what they do. So practice it in dungeons and then come back and practice on the striking dummy a little bit, but don't over-focus on the striking dummy too much, okay? Striking dummies are great for you to practice things like, oh, I want to get my 1, 2, 3s reeled down with my fight or flight and my goring blade, my OGCDs and all of this stuff. And it's like, it's all fine and dandy for you to practice that stuff, but you know, when it comes right down to actually learning, you have to do that in the dungeon or in the raid, okay? You have to do that there. So practice it there, try it out. And if you guys have any particular questions when it comes to tanking in Final Fantasy XIV, or if you feel that I've missed a specific thing, then feel free to point it out in the comment section below. Let me know how much I suck and all of that usual stuff. But yeah, that is going to be it for this video. Thank you all very much for watching. If you enjoyed it, hit up the like button. If you did not enjoy it, hit up with the dislike button. I'll see you guys in the next one. Stay strong, stay safe. Peace out.